Welcome, everyone, to another adventure into reality. Today, being the greatest adventure of all adventures, we are joined by special guest Sean David Morton and Montesaurus Dean Rex. Sean, are you there? I think he is still getting his water.
Yes. I'm here. I'm not Sean. I haven't done my hair. Damn you. And yes, there we go. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Sean will be here in just a second. We are going to be talking time travel, aliens, UFO, and things that go bump in the night.
Okay.
So, everyone gather around the storyteller's fire today. Sean, before the break, before we went on, we were just talking about time travel, and you said you had a specific story that you wanted to relate. Everyone here in the audience knows who you are and is wishing you all the best on your new life that you get here.
Thank you. Your camera is not adjusted right. I'm looking up your nose for some reason.
Sorry.
Don't tell him that. That's the fun part.
It looks like I'm looking up a two-car garage. It's funny. Am I supposed to be on camera as well, or what's? I don't know.
It doesn't matter, Sean. Whatever you want.
I don't have a background.
Free will.
Don't worry.
Don't worry. I just came from the doctor and I'm all messed up. I got my USC hat on and all that. So
cool. Relax. Just be a picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You want to talk about time stuff, right?
Time travel. We have a very experienced audience here, so we won't lose them.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna, I'll tell you everything that I know is true. And there's a lot of different theories and a lot of different, Einstein famously said that time only exists so that everything doesn't happen all at once. And that's also very true. And let me tell you my direct experiences, and then I'll give you the experiences that I've had. I ran an institute actually called the Prophecy Research Institute, and I had a newsletter for about 17 years. I was the number one guest on Coast to Coast AM. We had about 27 million people listening to the show. I actually produced the show early on because when we were going out to Area 51 and we were seeing saucers and phenomena and whatever else, we would drive to the Little Alien out there, which is in the town of Rachel. And the only guy that would pick up the phone that had a show in the middle of the night that we could hear was Art Bell. He had this kind of, personally, I thought it was kind of a crummy little, simply right of center sort of show. And I think I called him up and we were telling him what we were seeing from the base and that there was something heading towards him. And he actually ran out of his trailer and looked up in the sky and actually saw this thing moving over him. And I had just gotten back from doing a huge documentary called UFO Contactees. And we put together nearly 600 hours of footage. We had a budget of about 300,000. And we put together about 600 hours of footage, but we went to Billy Meyer's farm in Switzerland. We went up and down Italy. We spoke to Dr. Ribera, who's a national treasure in Spain. He was Jacques Cousteau's partner for years on the Calypso. And he was actually in contact with a race of beings called the Umo. And the Umo were in the process of, exploring Earth and doing all kinds of expeditionary stuff. They had actually warned a guy named Gautier about the AIDS virus and what it was being used for. A lot of interesting things. We were actually in the fields when the crop circle phenomenon happened, when they were just circles before they turned into glyphs. Matter of fact, it's interesting that the very first glyph crop circle became one of the most famous ones because it was used on the cover of the Led Zeppelin album. The one that had the Zeppelin that was moving over the field.
Yep. Yeah, there was another very a bunch of recent ones too that are getting more complicated.
Well, if
you look
at
DNA helix,
I should send this to you because it's the latest one, which is amazing to me. But it's actually the symbol of, I guess, what you would call the Andromedan Council or the Space Force or the actual, and it looks very much like the Star Trek. If I can find it, I'll send it over to you so you can use for your site. But it's amazing because it does look like the Star Trek symbol. You still there? There we go. I'm trying to do this stuff. And but it's the symbol of the, I guess you would call it the Andromedan Council or the Galactic Space Force. I mean, I write about it in the third book that I have called the Isomer Protocol, where we this gang called the Group, which is this super technology using gang of people that were run by Ted Humphrey, who's the main protagonist in my books. We basically punch these guys in the nose and break out, because the idea was that they wanted us trapped on this planet, which in some cases was for our protection, but in other cases it got to the point where it was just ridiculous, or we were not being allowed to go to the other planets because they saw us as a disease, as a virus, and that even our language was considered an infection, a bacteria that could turn this off, that could I want this. Hold on, I'm going to quit all this other stuff so that
Okay.
there's nothing going in here. Stand by. Yes, quit. All right, there we go. So, all right, where do I start? Okay, my own personal experience with this was in the 1970s. I came down to Southern California. I grew up in Atherton in NorCal, and I went to Stanford, and that's where I got introduced to remote viewing by Dr. Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff and Ego Swan, and then those guys actually came into one of our Psychology 101 classes, and gave us all the basics of remote viewing. And then we remote viewed some kids and wherever they were going to be on campus at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, and it worked. And through this, I was romantically involved with Dr. Elizabeth Targ, who was actually Russell's daughter, and we lived together in Hermosa Beach for a while, and we came up with what we call associative remote viewing protocols, which allowed us to predict the outcome of horse races, football games, but mostly roulette. And she was putting her way through medical school to become a psychiatrist. Of course, she needed a whole team of Viennese psychiatrists to figure me out. But we'd go to Vegas and, with a stake of $2,000-$3,000 and come back with about 30 grand. And it paid all the bills and, paid her medical school. And anyway, so neither here nor there. So I was going down to my Uncle Fred Bell's house, and Dr. Fred Bell. And Fred he graduated from the University of Michigan when he was 14. And he was the youngest checkout engineer at 23 on the Apollo program, which was the most complicated set of machines ever devised. And he was in contact with the Pleiadians. And we used to see ships flying around his house all the time. And he eventually came to be in contact with Semyaze, who was the same woman from the Billy Meyer case. And this created a huge rift between Meyer and Fred, because Meyer still continues to claim that he's the only real contactee on Earth, and he's the only real guy that's ever talked to the Pleiadians, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, that just is ridiculous.
Well, even in the books, Semyaze, in his contact message from the Pleiades, Semyaze admitted to talking to other people and having adventures. Long story short, Fred built a time machine in his backyard. It was 4 stories high. It was a big pyramid, and the other side, you got the targets floating in space, mind you. That's great. And it was it was all based on his scalar wave pyramid tech. And so it was a pyramid on top, a pyramid underneath that made it a dodecahedron with a platform around the outside. And we hooked this thing up into the city. I mean, I had to use all my lumberjack gear to actually climb up a pole and actually connect it with a couple of jumper cables that went down to the whole thing to this big panel that you threw a switch, and it was very Doc Brown, Marty McFly kind of stuff. And Fred used this thing twice, and both times that we hit it, Fred had to go to the hospital because he was bleeding out his nose and his eyes and his ears. And one of the things that we found that was a pediment to time travel, if you will, is that when you move into a future or past space, and this was kind of an interesting thing. I mean, remember, okay, you guys all saw the Terminator, right?
Yes.
When Schwarzenegger comes in at Griffith Park, and you've got that great shot where he's naked and he's got the big purple bubble around him. Weirdly enough, that's absolutely true. You need this bubble, this protective shield, because what happens is that when you move into the future, it's hard to explain. You have 7 chakras in your body, and each one of these chakras basically burns at a different color. Because
so they have to match your reality from one to the other.
Well,
and the technology matches your vibration to the new reality.
Kind of. It's each chakra I don't mean to disagree with you. I'm just saying that from what I knew, each chakra resonates with a different endocrine gland, and each endocrine gland has a different vibration or frequency moving up your body.
Yep.
But what people don't take into account is that those 7 chakras have 7 chakras going out into the outward field. So in other words, you're not just vibrating at a 7 chakra frequency. Each one of those chakras has 7 chakras around it. So it starts at the outside, which is what we call the causal plane, which is where God lives. And then you have the causal plane, the etheric plane, the astral plane, where all kinds of weird, creepy shit lives. You don't want to you don't want to go into the astral plane. It's bad. You go into the astral plane, you go into a spiritual plane, you go into a mental plane and a physical plane. So you've got these 7 layers going outwards. And the problem with any of this time travel is, or any even teleportation as an example, because we protected ourselves. When I say we, the group, or it's parts of the guy. It's not really the government. That's why it's hard to explain. There's another organization that's private that won't let anything out to the governments of the world, but they've had technology that has not been lost over the course of 500 or 600 years, to say. And we started teleporting things back and forth. The first teleportation, which was happening at Montauk, was we were teleporting this probe. It was a probe. I think the probe was called Alvin, actually. But what we were doing is we were teleporting probes into, oh, that's nice. No, thank you. Into the heart of Russian military, atomic military tests. The reason we were doing this, and this was what Fred was doing when he was a kid at the University of Michigan, is that they were testing the fields. They were blowing stuff up at Michigan, and at the heart of any explosion, there's a time flux. And so the ultimate time flux is that if you can actually view the inside of an atomic explosion, you have a huge flux in time, because time stops at the center of the explosion. But at the same time, if you make it atomic or hydrogen or cobalt or whatever, it will actually rip a hole in the time-space continuum, which is bad, because there's bad things on the other side of that door. And slowly we began to discover that there's been a fence that's actually been put up around the Earth to keep really bad shit from coming in. And this not only had to do with things interdimensionally, but it had to do with things extraterrestrially. Now you can go all the way back to the book of Enoch.
Yeah.
And if you look at Enoch, go ahead.
One of the things that I've talked about in my own thing is that Earth is one of the most fortified planets in this galaxy, astrally, physically, and spiritually.
Why is that?
Because it's a unique prize. When Earth is in, let's just say, a neutral growth state, I call it what's called a 7th dimensional galactic seed planet, meaning it's here to create life, and that life will be teleported off and grafted onto new blank Akashic Record worlds.
Very good. That's what
it's a life seeding place.
It says that in the Bible. You know that, right?
Yeah,
it's
to seed new worlds. Yeah,
that we're actually going to live amongst these constellations, and Nostradamus talks about us living in the constellations of Aquarius and Cancer, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also, people don't realize this, that the universe itself, and this comes from a UFO contactee, my good friend Alice Haggerty, she was taken outside the universe. And when she looked back at the universe was a giant man. It looked like an Alex Gray painting. And it had these, that's exactly what she described it as. And that you had the chakras, and the being, which she called the doctor, on the ship full of these, these little 4-foot tall ETs. He was taken out of time himself, because he was taken by the Mayans. He was a Mayan Indian. And because he knew the nature of the universe, he was made the captain of this mission. And she was being taken on board the ship so that they could harvest her eggs and actually grow a hybrid species on the ship. But what she saw, when she had this weird feeling, and she said, "Where are we?" And the Mayan doctor said, "I'm answering your question, which is, what is God?" And we're outside the universe. And the view screen moves, and she sees this giant glowing man in space. And she said, "Well, where are we?" And he points to the heart of the grand man. He says, "That's your planet. You're at the center of the heart chakra, and the consciousness of the entire universe is rising. So that's why Earth is important right now, because you're at the center of the heart chakra of the grand man." Yeah. Big, long story. So going back to the time travel aspect of it, so Fred builds this machine where he figures the whole thing out, where he figures, and it's interesting because if you look at the take a look at the Avengers, the Avengers Endgame movie, and you've got Tony Stark when he's all crippled and whatever else, and he's moving things around, and he has the computer put it's a toroid loop. Actually, it's a big figure 8, and this is exactly what Fred had drawn in his diagrams about how to manipulate and travel through time. And there it was in the Endgame movie, right where Tony says, he gets a look on his face and he says, I figured it out. And I think he goes to see Ant-Man or Captain America, says, I figured it out. I figured out how we can travel through time. So long story short, for my time travel experience. So I flip the switch on this thing. We black out the city when we do it because he was in Laguna Beach. And his house was on top of a dormant volcano. And it was the same area where George Adamski actually used to live and had his visits from whoever, who was his main guy? He claimed they were from Venus and Saturn and everywhere in here. And Orthon, I think, was the guy that he was in contact with. And so we blacked out the city when we did it. And I watched this entire 4-story structure like disappear before my eyes. And the thing went from, it was interesting because it went from the outside in when it disappeared. And when it came back, it came back about 4 minutes later. And the thing from the inside, I mean, there was this huge like explosion, like a boosh, when it came back and displaced the air. I'm pounding on the outside of the thing, and I grabbed Fred, who's a big guy. And, he's like 6'3" or so. And I finally pull him out of this thing into the house. And I said, I'm taking you to the hospital. And he said, no, just put me in the bed. And his bed had a pyramid over it with a capstone on it that had lasers and all kinds of crazy stuff on it. And I'm saying, I'm gonna take it to the hospital. He goes, no, I'll be okay. And I got some wet rags for his head, some cold rags for his head. And he grabs me by the shirt. And he goes, Sean, he pulls me on. I said, what, Fred, what? And he goes, the future, it isn't there. And he passes out. And it was very dramatic stuff. And I began to realize that what was happening is that creation is occurring at the moment we get there. So if you look at where the causal field is, it's not behind us creating things and then generating outward. It's not really the Big Bang. It's the big, we create this timeline when we interact with it. So it's almost like, I think there was a Twilight Zone episode or something where a guy would turn very quickly and see these blue men in like blue gear, but they were creating the future as we got there. So it's almost like you've got 8 billion people or whatever on the planet holding hands, walking backwards, and at each moment it proves the Zen koan that an apple is not an apple until you create it to be as such.
Right. See, what I like to give the modern colloquial terminologies for subjects like this. This is where we have a precognitive workforce and a postcognitive workforce that helps change our perceptions, because perception can slide 1 degree and reveal a greater truth. Looking at it through one angle versus versing at it another angle. And when we allow a precognitive workforce, it's in the moment, because there's an infinite possibility of choices in the moment. What ultimately is the consciousness that's related to the reality that's still the heart of man and the heart of the universe? How is it going to react individually and collectively and uncollectively?
And that's why I'm the lazy Time Lord. See how that works?
I like that. Especially since you have the TARDIS in the background.
Well, yeah, Andrew called me the lazy Time Lord many months ago, and I'm taking it on.
Yes,
it's like,
moniker.
I have apparel now for sale that have the lazy Time Lord, and it's like, yeah, I've got time.
It's nice to actually see you. I haven't actually seen you. You're far uglier than your picture, is all I can say.
See my cunning plan. This is why we don't hang out, Sean.
All right, so that was
my joke is I'm real.
Yeah. So okay, so this was in the 70s. This was like 78, where Fred had the time machine, and it was so weird because a guy, while we were working on it, a guy came to the door, and he was from the city, and he's like, "You got a permit for your time machine?" And we had to tear the thing down because we couldn't figure out how to get a permit for this time machine for this thing he's got in his yard. But he proved a lot of interesting things, because again, he was studying time in Michigan. Then when I got the sands of time, diaries, if you will, that I then molded into kind of an action adventure thing. So I would not get arrested and I would not go to prison, which is what happened to me because I printed those books. And I was warned. I mean, I was warned by the guy that gave it to me. He said, if you print these, they're going to get you. They'll lose something. They'll just make something up, which they did.
Just make it up. Yep.
And I mean, I wasn't found guilty. As a matter of fact, the prosecutor came out and said, well, there's no victims and there's no monetary loss to anybody. So I'm like, then what did I do? How did I, and I kept saying, I'd like to see my accuser. And they said, well, your accuser is the United States government. And I said, but it doesn't exist. It's a pile of paper. I would like them in the courtroom tomorrow on the stand to, to testify. So it was conspiracy. You didn't actually do anything, but you thought about it, that sort of thing. So
thought
so
crimes.
now,
Thought crimes. Oh no, thought crimes.
So
You've been thinking again. Get in the jail box.
Can't be thinking, because thinking people are really dangerous. And all right, so switch to just a couple of years later. I'm living up in the Hollywood area because I was working at Paramount. And actually, at first I was working at Universal because I'd sold the script to Buck Rogers. And it was a great idea, great script. And they decided that the idea was so great that they were going to take Buck off in an completely direction, but not shoot the bridge episode that I wrote. But I got paid, they backed a truck of money up to my house and gave me a bunch of dough for this thing. So I'm living on Cahuenga Boulevard, and I somehow run into a lecture or something. I think it was at the Bodhi Tree, but a man named Hal Wilcox. And Hal's dad, Harold Wilcox, his dad or his grandfather, had actually founded Hollywood, actually had the real estate parcel called Hollywood Land, that they became the studios and, became United Artists. And it was, I think, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks and Charlie Chaplin and whatever else. So Hal became a UFO contactee, and he was a music professor at USC, and he famously got corralled by a ship that had actually landed at the back of the university, and he had had conversations in his head for years with somebody named Commander Faj, and the voice in his head suddenly stepped out of the craft and said, "Hello, I'm Commander Faj. We're here to take you to a place, be interested in." And they took him to their planet called Cello, was the name of the planet. And he lived there for a couple of weeks, and he took pictures, and he brought back rock samples that were extraterrestrial. And he was really one of the first guys because he was on the Jack Paar show, and then Steve Allen, and but he was one of the original guys in the late 50s and 60s who was talking about UFOs and ETs and whatever else. He was one of the leaders when we have a place here in Southern California that's out by Landers, which was called Giant Rock. And thousands of people used to come to Giant Rock. It was the Area 51 in the late 50s and 60s, and continued to be that until the actor who played Hopalong Cassidy was mysteriously killed. Literally, it was one of those closed door mysteries because it was like somebody grabbed him, did something to him, and just like pushed him out of a helicopter or something. It was very weird because there was no clues, there was no footprints, there was no blood. It was literally like he'd just been pushed out of a helicopter and nobody could figure out why. So we used to go to these things at Hal's house, and this is a time travel story. The first Monday of every month, we would meet at Hal's house, and we would do certain conversations and certain meditations where one of the people in the group would suddenly pop and start to, I can't say channel, but communicate with Commander Faj. And so the person would come out, Faj would say, "I'm not dead. I'm not some spirit. I'm communicating on a frequency that tunes into this person's brainwave, and I'm using their body to speak to you." So at the point of one of these meetings, we were then asked to go find books by a particular guy. And I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but they said that it's important that the world become aware of a man by the name of Rajneesh Gurdjieff. No idea. No, didn't know who it was. I thought I was up on everybody. And they said, "We need you to go out and find books by this person. And next month, we want you to bring them to the meeting." Okay, fine. So I went to the Bodhi Tree. I went to the Hollywood Bookfinders. I went to Needham Bookfinders because obviously we didn't have the internet back then. And nothing. I mean, I even dated for a while this girl, Julie, at the Bodhi Tree. I took her out to coffee and kind of picked her brain and all this stuff. And a lovely, lovely girl. Used to hang out there in the corner and read a bunch of books. And so everybody else has the same problem. They said, "This guy doesn't exist. They're just yanking our crank now. And this whoever this Gurdjieff guy is a myth." So it's the Monday of our heading over there to go to a meeting at Hal's house. And I walk into Bodhi Tree and I say, "Hey, Julie, did you ever get any of those books in by that Rajneesh Gurdjieff guy?" And she said, she points to the cabinet, a glass case, and she goes, "Yeah, they're right there." I said, "Oh, you got them in?" And she says, "No, they've been here since this place opened 15 years ago." And I said, "Well, what about, I filled out a card. You have it?" And she said, "I'll go check." No card. And I said, "Well, what are you doing later? You want to go out for coffee?" And she goes, "Who are you?" I said, "Come on, man, we like went out, I mean, almost to the point of like having sex." And it's like, I know I'm unforgettable, but I'm not that unforgettable. So, oh, there he is. Oh my goodness, yes. So, the craziest part about this is she had no clue who I was, had never met me before. She says, "I've never seen you before in my life. Shut up before I call security." And which is why, which is what all women want, because when I get close to them, they always yell security. So, so I get a bunch of the Gurdjieff books. I run down to Hollywood Bookfinders, which was down on Hollywood Boulevard, and same thing. I get a bunch of books there. I call Needham Bookfinders, and they're like, "Yeah, we got a bunch of books." He's everywhere, and I'm an idiot because I've never heard of him, never read him, never whatever. So we get to the house, get to Hal's apartment. Everybody's flipped out. I mean, they're just, the eyes are, saucers, and they've got stacks of these books. Shut up! I turned this off. And everybody had the same story, where they were saying, "We just today, he's everywhere." So finally what happens is, and I think this was Hal himself who actually popped and started talking about this, and Faj was saying, "You're part of a group of 48 worlds in this part of the universe that are moving upwards and evolving. And we were allowed, because you did what we asked you to do and you were dedicated to it, and because you carried out the mission that we laid down for you, to go back in time." And we went back in time and we changed one event. And this was an English journalist who caught a train that he missed in the former timeline. And they said they just like put a gust of air behind him, which made one last step as his train was leaving the station. He gets on the train. He goes to a lecture by Gurdjieff, is so impressed and amazed by Gurdjieff, because Gurdjieff had a particular type of yoga that was, he had a whole group of people where you could tell them to run to the front of the stage and then he'll stop and they could freeze. They had such amazing body control. And he was so amazed by Gurdjieff that he brought Gurdjieff to the United States. Gurdjieff began to speak in the United States, and then he got him a book deal. And so, Gurdjieff's books, and they said it subtly changed the nature of the spiritual aspect of the 20th century, which didn't really affect the timeline, but it affected the spirit of the people.
Yes.
So
like many of the 60s rockers who passed on, they passed on this timeline, but exist in another timeline. And then there's even another timeline where many of the rockers that died all lived, and they were having a reunion tour. They all did simultaneous disclosure.
Wow. Okay, let me blow your mind one more time. So my question was, have you done any other major changes in the timeline of the planet? Oh man, that opened up a
can of worms. Timeline worms.
Yeah,
get the whiteboard out.
It was no, I mean, we had people in the group who had nervous breakdowns after this, who just went completely flippy. And so what Hal said, channeling Faj, is that we did a major reboot of your timeline, and that was the fact that your Earth had become a giant prison.
Yep.
Your planet had been taken over by the British, the Russians, the Germans, and the Chinese. And they said it was literally like Orwell's boot, a boot stamping on a human face for 1,000 years. And because there was no freedom, there could be no spirituality. And so they were allowed to go back in time. You can imagine this. If you were to say, change one event in human history that would affect all of human history, that would lead us to the place where we would eventually develop civilizations that would and could be free. Could you pick it out of all of time?
No, I could.
All right, well, here it is.
I could come close.
Okay, take your best shot.
And I've heard this story before, so I'll shut up.
So hold on. My best choice in all of time to change one thing.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It's hard.
Napoleon wins Waterloo.
Okay, but you would have to go back to before that, see, because in order for England and America to even exist the way they existed. So if he wins at Waterloo, what does he get? He just gets his old empire back. So it's not at that.
No. He doesn't do the Louisiana Purchase.
See, but you got to go back further. Okay, I'll just tell you.
So okay, go ahead.
So what it is that this is what Commander Faj said. He said, we went back to a pivotal point in time. And remember, this is another major thing as far as changing timelines and actually moving through the time stream. If there's a wave that's coming towards the shore, a tidal wave or whatever else, the only way to stop that wave is to create an equal and opposite wave moving in the opposite direction to be able to flatten that wave out. Well, in this case,
or outcreate it,
or you've got to go back to the exact point in time where a fish jumps and a dolphin eats it and jumps up out of the water and does whatever. And the wind is a certain way that actually processes through it. So the crazy part about this is what they did is they went back to the battle of the battle of 1588. And it was the battle of the Spanish Armada versus England. So if you can imagine the unlikeliness of Britain winning that battle, you're talking about the greatest navy possibly in the history of the world up to that time, which would be the equivalent of the United States Navy being defeated by the Mexican Navy in the Gulf of Mexico. And so what happens is that they claim that they simply put a puff of wind in the sails of a British frigate that allowed it to T-bar on a Spanish man of war, and that they whipped up this storm. They whipped up the weather. And because that one frigate managed to T-bar the man of war and sink it, that changed the outcome of the entire battle. Because remember, the Spanish were coming to England with the Inquisition. I mean, they had
30,000 troops ready to land, and another 100,000 troops that land after that.
Right. And they had the instruments of torture to go into England and wipe out the Protestant religion completely.
And I relate that to the cursed Aztec gold that got to them.
There you go. Yeah, that could be it as well.
Okay.
But that one incident is what eventually allowed the freedom of thought and religion in England, which then led to the freedom of thought and religion in the United States and Australia and Canada and all these different places.
Because
that one thing
stopped the banking system, because what rose out of that battle was the banking system,
right,
to support the naval fleets, so they'd never be outdone.
But it led to America, and we were told that America as it is, the American Revolution, et cetera, and we were also told that should America fail in its mission of freedom, I mean, because there's nobody left to save us. If we go down, that's it. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's interesting, because this all then plays into the group and into, I guess, the group versus because the guys above them is called the council, and they're this old ancestral money that goes back 500 or 600 years. And, they have a certain agenda as well to also enslave the world, in which they're going to be stopped. So the reason the timeline is shifting. So let's take it from there. So that one incident, that's the pivotal point in history, is that the British win the battle of the Spanish Armada at that particular time under Queen Elizabeth, which allows the colonization of allows the new colonization of the New World, et cetera, et cetera. And that leads us to where we are, our freedoms today. And the reason we need to be extra vigilant about that is because, again, if these guys win, there's no one to come and save us.
That's right.
Well, the only people
an individual. One of the big things I say, this is an individual awakening, not a collective. And each individual has to go through their own journey to even figure out what a collective is.
Very wise.
Well, also, there's other entities like the Arcturians and Pleiadians and so on and so forth. They all have agendas. That's one thing.
They have a non-interference thing.
Because they don't want the karma. They don't want to be the saviors.
No. It's more that they're chicken shit.
Oh, that too. I like that.
They don't want to face the bloody losses that they have faced before, which is their own form of spiritual PTSD as a species, because they have been let's just say, the peacekeepers of the galaxy for too long.
Okay.
And then somebody else needs to take the position.
Yeah, Oh, it just, yeah, from my understanding, which is changing, is that they wouldn't want to become the saviors because humanity has to do it itself. And so they want to take on the karma of like, oh, we have to help the. It's like when you're friendly to the the dorky kid on the playground, and for the next 3 years he follows you around. It's like, you just go away. I just said hello. Go away.
Well, whenever Earth comes out of its grand journey, its people have a greater purpose throughout the galaxy. And it'll be those early consciousness explorers who get to see the roadway that's been paved by the ancestors of the past, waiting for us to go through our growth into collectivism.
Well, Billy Meyer had an interesting thing to say about it, as did Fred Bell, that the Pleiadians kind of withdrew their protections. And
Sure,
the
twice.
reason the Pleiadians quit is because every time the Pleiadians interfered, and I can tell this personally, because I've known and interviewed and befriended a lot of these Pleiadian contactees, and they're assholes. They're really assholes. And that's one of the things I found, that the Pleiadians are just kind of jerks. And the people.
So the defender class is absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
And
So
those are the ones that are stationed here for 300, 400, 500 years, and they've really become, the butt of the joke. Humans are the butt of their jokes.
well, supposedly what happened at one of these Andromedan councils, and I'm not talking about Andromeda the galaxy, I'm talking about Andromeda the star cluster, was that there you go. Now I can see you. That glowing white shirt that you're wearing against the you look like a star, like a supernova bursting.
That's because I came outside and I have my magic zero no green screen zoom taking over my background, so it's like the white shirt's glowing because there's outside light.
Okay, all right, there. You could just wear a different color shirt,
I felt like wearing white today.
You should wear a green shirt, and then you would become part of the cosmos. And it's
yes, I do, just a floating head.
Right.
Just like Queen Elizabeth II, where like she wears that green and everyone just keeps, the Star Trek uniform or pizza or too much spare time on Photoshop.
So Sean, you were saying how assholes the Pleiadians are, and I was really agreeing with you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Did they go native? Because we're assholes too. Is that what it is?
I mean, one aspect of this is that I was working for Unsolved Mysteries. And I had put a whole deal together for us to do an hour, maybe a 2-hour special on Billy Meyer. And I was good friends with Billy's son, Methuselah, who was staying at my house at the time. And I bought rights to a book from Guido Moosberger called Und sie fliegen Dag, which was And Yet They Fly. And Billy screwed me on the deal. I mean, it was so weird because we made an agreement with them to pay him $25,000 for an interview. And we were working on the, getting the rights to his footage and the UFO footage and the whole thing. I mean, we were ranked the 4th biggest show. We were ranked number 4 in the top 10. It was a huge program. And it was interesting because Robert Stack had been a family friend for years. I mean, my mom used to drop us off at his house, and, he and his wife would babysit us with his kids. And the crazy part about this is that Billy wrote my producer a letter. Now, I'd been to Billy's house. We interviewed him for a couple of days, did this whole thing as far as the documentary goes. And he really didn't like Americans, but he took a shine to me. We became friends, and he actually gave me this peach that came from a Pleiadian peach, and it was the greatest thing greatest thing I've ever put in my mouth. And I should have actually saved the pit, and grown Pleiadian peaches here. But Billy then writes a letter to my producer that says, because I knew Fred Bell, that he didn't want me working on the project. And it's like, literally, he was like, so wait, so Billy doesn't like someone and he wants to kick you off this project. And I was like, apparently that's it. And it's like, John Cosgrove was like, so Sean, are these people assholes before the UFOs get a hold of them? Or is there some machine that turns them into assholes, when they go up on the ships? And he said, no, exact words were, fuck him. I'm not going to do anything without you. You're the one that brought us the project. You developed the project. And if he doesn't want to do it with you, then screw him. This led to Bob Kevitt, my partner, just losing his mind. And he did a whole special called UFOs World's Greatest Hoaxes. And he turned the dogs loose on Billy. Every critic of Billy, he gave airtime to just say, he's a fake, he's a weirdo, he's a, whatever. And they tore him apart, and the whole thing never got made. Now, I knew another Pleiadian contactee named Adrien, and he had better footage, he had better pictures, he had UFOs flying in and swooping around the balcony of his house in the apartment where he was, and he would never give us rights to anything. We took him to ABC, NBC, Unsolved Mysteries, took him all over the place, and he would not give us rights to his footage or to an interview or whatever else. He just didn't want to do it, and
because it had changed the timeline.
I don't know about that, but it's
Absolutely, it would have. Think about it. If you just say, let's say during the height of the Mexico City sightings, the best of the best footage came out, undeniable proof, where millions were watching it every day.
But
that information would change things. Yeah.
Yeah, but that happened in Mexico. I mean, it was a predicted date in the Mayan calendar. It was the end of the sixth sun, and it was talking about the return of the gods. So we had footage from hundreds of people, because
but it was still blurry, grainy, not the highest accuracy level.
I
It was
disagree.
real camera.
It wasn't. You had, matter of fact, they have classes at the University of Mexico where you can actually, they teach you how to analyze your UFO footage. There's so much down there. And Jaime Maussan, who was like the Mike Wallace, it was like the 60 Minutes of Mexico. He got so much footage from this, and for some reason they like going down there better than up here. So let's talk about it.
Well, the idea couldn't get into the narrative. Like it is there and it does exist. But I think what Andrew's kind of pointing out is the three networks in the United States didn't plaster it like on CNN for 24 hours, where everyone could see it and understand what's going on. And so it is that sort of where you're coming from? Where
that's where I was coming from. It didn't trip the system and go viral.
See, but first off, there was no viral when it happened, in Mexico. You didn't really have the internet,
right?
You didn't have any of the stuff that we've got now. We barely had CNN, but it was it makes the TV. People who think this stuff is being covered up are wrong. The challenge is that when you release it into the media, there's no who, what, when, why, where, how. There's a what. It's up there, but there's no who. There's no why. There's no, it's a when. Oh, it was over there. I mean, we just had 2 big UFOs fly over San Diego for like all night, and it was on the news. But people are like, people laugh and go, because you don't know what it is, you don't know who it is, you have none of the things that actually fit into the journalistic aspect of this. So let me talk about my Sands of Time books here, because it's they've been called by people like like Jim Mars, by people like Carrie Cassidy, like the greatest disclosure documents ever written. And I would agree, because it goes back into the guts of this. It starts in Montauk. It tells you how we were teleporting things into the heart of Russian nuclear experiments to be able to study the time stream. The reason you had the 9 craft that were taken into Area 51 to the S4 area over at Papoose Lake, not actually the Area 51 area is basically just reserved for, Northrop and Grumman and the Skunk Works and ramjets, scramjets, plutonium pulse drives, stealth fighters, et cetera, et cetera. You've got the triangle ships, which most of what you've seen is the TR-3B, but they're up to like the TR-9, which, by the way, SR, which was the SR-71 Blackbird, that I think is kind of funny because you see Tom Cruise flying at the beginning of the Maverick movie. They're up to now and SR stands for surveillance and reconnaissance, and TR stands for terrestrial reconnaissance. And they're these big triangles that basically just float up in the ionosphere and up in the atmosphere and just look at everything that's going on in entire countries. And so the TR-8s and 9s, they've got a plasma drive in the center that then moves outward, and it creates this bubble around the outside of the ship. And then when it teleports from place to place, once again, remember I was telling you, you have to have a shield, and the shield has to be in such a way so you don't get sucked into the future or the past or to another place, actually inside out. And in the early 60s, we could teleport stuff all over the place, but it was literally being reorganized inside out. So, you could take a China plate and the made in China on the back would come out reversed. They would take anything living that you put in there would literally come out inside out. It was horrible. And it wasn't until we had a very, we studied a guy named Kohler, and he had a very low resonating shield. that could create a low resonating shield. And it wasn't until we figured out the Kohler device that we could actually then create the shield that allowed us to be able to bounce through space and ultimately time. Because if I want to go from here to there with you're literally traveling through time as you're going from point A to point B without the time distortion of going 60 miles an hour or whatever else. So you are in fact time traveling because you're taking the time aspect out of going from one place to another. Now, with the ships at 5-1, the reason they were there, for example, when Bob Lazar came in, he was basically a Q-16, which is basically that's as low as you can get to actually be allowed on the base. The president of the United States has a Q-8 clearance and isn't allowed into any of these places because he's a temporary public servant who's only there for about 8 years or so. Now Clinton really wanted to know about what was going on at 5-1, and in every case he was rebuked. And as a matter of fact, he sent a spy in there, and they found out who he was, and they found out what he was doing, and that he was reporting back to Clinton. And they took him out in the desert and made him what they call a target of opportunity, which means, you go run around and we'll shoot at you for some practice and, until you're dead. And Clinton mentioned that incident. Actually, I've got a series of clips where everything that I said in the book, Clinton actually came out and made public statements about how he sent a man into 5-1 to find out what's going on. And he makes this weird face, and he makes this scrunched up face, and he goes, well, it didn't work out very well. And I've got that incident in the book. Lazar was a low-level scientist. They wanted to bring a guy in with no real formal training to see if he could back engineer the ships, and he really couldn't. So that meant that should one of these ships crash somewhere, and should somebody else get a hold of them, that we were fairly confident that nobody else could figure out how to make them. But the 9 craft that were there not because we were interested in the propulsion systems. We'd figured out antimatter drives and what element 115 was for, and how they're working that. We were interested in the fact that these craft had the ability to dilate time. So if you and I were to
something else that was a part of a greater Montauk experiment with the chair also.
Okay, all right. Well, that's Peter Moon stuff, and you don't know if anything he says is true. So it's just
I'm
saying.
No, I'm whether or not it's Peter Moon or not is individual. It's something that's entered the greater, what we'll just call cosmology of ufology in total.
Right.
Because language means a lot. Whether Peter Moon created that or not, it is for a non-concept that it was consciousness forms of time travel versus mechanical time travel. And what you're saying is the objects that they had reverse engineered to the capacity is they had figured out the technology that allowed consciousness to be protected in that low-level field.
Yeah, they managed to, right.
Yeah.
They managed to open doors. The weird thing about that is they needed basically prepubescent kids. And that's what became known as the Montauk Boys, because they're something about their electromagnetic system doesn't,
and their genetics too.
Yeah, until you go through puberty. So that was a interesting part of it. I mean, Al Bielek and I were really good friends, and in his last days, I was it was very sad because he was broke, and I was supporting him for the last years of his life in his little apartment down in Florida. And I was paying his rent, and I heard everything that Al ever told me that I could check turned out to be true. And this has a lot to do with the Philadelphia experiment, because when you were talking about the fence that was put up to protect us, there were 2 major breaches of that fence. And the first breach of the fence was when Hans Kammler, who's the Obergruppenführer of the Third Reich, he was the second most powerful man next to Hitler, and had about 1,400 people enslaved under him at one point. He found an engine, which you guys know of as the Nazi Bell. And this engine was a star drive that they found in an Aldebaranian ship that had crashed in the Black Forest. And when they took the star drive out of this thing, they found that the bell, the Die Glock, as it was also called, could create violet whips of solitons, because solitons are the actual particles that make time travel possible. The problem is that if one of these solitons hit you, you would almost instantaneously age several hundred years. You'd just turn into a pile of dust. And so he would just get a bunch of Jews in the camps and say, go clean that up. Of course, poof, they would just explode into a bunch of particles. But what they what they ultimately did, and this, I could go on forever in this, but this goes to Marina Orsich and how Marina Orsich was channeling this guy named Eckert, and then suddenly Eckert moves aside, and they're now being contacted by the Aldebaranians. And Aldebaran is it's the red star in the eye of Taurus in the constellation of the Hyades. And these are the ones that started contacting humanity. And every goal of these beings has been to rip holes in this fence, which we've managed to do as the precursor or prelude to an invasion of Earth. Now, if you go back into the history of just what I've studied on this, supposedly the dinosaurs were wiped out from a war between these tall whites who are known as Lyran and the Aldebaranians, who actually ripped open these dimensional holes in the time-space continuum. And so the whole function of the group, which is these people with a whole, which is sort of what the MJ-12 commission then morphed into the group. You've had the council, who's been above everybody because they make up the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Dows, but they go all the way back to the de Medicis. They go all the way back to the emperors and the kings of Rome and the popes and all that. So imagine that there were technological advances by guys like Da Vinci, in the 1500s, and they invented airplanes. And let's say, he invented the first ornithopter airplane and hot air balloons and submarines and all that. What if we had continued to develop that? Because then if you look at Jules Verne with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and you have Captain Nemo, who's Muslim, and it's interesting that he's Muslim because the Muslims never murdered scientists like the Catholics or the Christians did. And if you've never lost a technological advance, I mean, the Nautilus in the book has an atomic reactor. And I mean, they stare into the heart of the reactor, and he describes to the T exactly what an atomic reactor would look like in a nuclear submarine, which is exactly what the Nautilus was.
And they came out in what, 1880s?
Yeah, 1880s. Yeah, and then you move forward to H.G. Wells, also a Fabian socialist, who basically patterns out what the whole 20th century is going to be like. Then you move to George Orwell, and Orwell, whose real name was Eric Blair, he also was a Fabian socialist. And there you go. Is that James Mason?
I think it is.
Yes, it's James Mason. It's Captain Nemo. It's the great way to do a British accent is you just pretend you're constipated on the toilet. It's like, James Mason. Oh, imagine if James Mason was one of the Three Stooges. Larry, Curly, I'm going to have to slap both of you very hard. Now,
I do like Eddie Izzard doing, he just likes doing James Mason. And so every time he's doing English accents, I mean, even though Eddie Izzard is English, he would do James Mason. It's like how the English lost India. Are they? Are you sure? It's just, yeah, James Mason is awesome.
James Mason and Sam Neill are the same guy.
Yes.
Sam Neill. My God, is that a dinosaur? Sam Neill, think about it. Sam Neill and James Mason, same guy. So anyway, so in Sands of Time, and I've been bounced off the wall by people like Carrie Cassidy as an example. And Carrie is like, well, how can this be? And how can they ignore everything? And how can the planet be as messed up as it is, et cetera, et cetera? And they have the power to do this. And I keep trying to explain to Carrie, I'm like, sweetie, it's just below their pay grade. You got to understand that their goal is to use the super science that they have. And this is why they knew what the timeline was coming down as. They knew, for example, Washington, D.C. was destroyed in 2006 by a red Mercury device. And I know for a fact that they used predictions that I made and predictions that were made by a group of remote viewers in the E-ring part of the Pentagon, which was called Project Foresight. And I was part of that. And I can explain to you the whole thing about how they started bugging me to do remote viewings on them, first on germs and on viruses. But then it shifted to Osama bin Laden. And they used my predictions to basically blow him up in February of 2002, and he died sometime later. But he died sometime in April or May of 2002, and then everything after that of who he was, what he was, etc., was complete nonsense. It was just so we could. The Pakistani government the Pakistani government announced that he was dead in May of 2002, and the United States said, "Really? You want a bunch of tanks? You want guns? You want us to keep sending you money?" Well, yes, we would
He's a-
like that very much. He says, then you're going to shut up and you're going to pretend that he's alive like we did. And the whole thing with the whole thing when they supposedly killed him with Obama, it was a complete minstrel show. It was complete nonsense.
Remember, was it Madeleine Albright, as Bush Jr. was leaving office? She said something weird like, "Don't wheel out Osama bin Laden and get him off ice," or something like that. And basically she hinted on live television that it's like he died, in 2002, but the narrative, they're waiting for the right time to use the character in the story.
Yeah, I guess. And why Obama decided, because obviously he was Muslim or had major Muslim sympathies, why they would do the whole thing of what they did. I mean, what happened was you had one helicopter land and explode, and another helicopter that was circling it that circled 3 times and then just went away. And their story about how one helicopter exploded and they loaded everybody, including the body, including the dogs with titanium teeth who were obviously trained to bite anybody that smelled like hummus, I guess. And then the Russians went in the next day with camera crews and they found no bullets, there was no blood, there was no nothing, et cetera, et cetera. So, and what I said, just to, so people don't think I'm a complete nut job saying, oh yeah, I killed bin Laden. I was on Coast to Coast AM in front of 27 million people on December 28th. And I told them about my experience with Project Foresight and these E-ring Pentagon guys. And I said, you're going to find that what's going to happen is that between January 25th and February 5th, said this on the radio in front of 28 million people, 27. They're going to blow him up. He's going to be coming through a pass outside of the city of Kaust. I told them to watch this pass for this period of time. They were, and when his caravan came through, they sent a bunch of drones in to blow it up. And on February 5th, because it happened on the 3rd, I think, of February, they've sent out a notice to all of the people in the bin Laden family saying they needed blood and tissue samples from the family to compare against the blood splatters on the ground and the tissue samples that they had to match it up against whether it was bin Laden. And they all came out positive. This was on the news at the time. And I was told by Colonel Elaine, I don't know why all these women in the military named Elaine, but she said, yeah, we got him, but we didn't get him. We blew up, messed up. We just heard that he was mortally wounded, but he limped around for a while. And he didn't die until April. And I was also told he died in the presence of a couple of CIA officers, and that he has a star on the wall at CIA, and that he was taken back to Mecca and was buried in the Mecca complex at that time. So, and then he just kind of disappears. Then you have a bunch of audio that comes out from CIA, and CIA wants FBI to verify it. And the FBI guys threw their hands up and said, no way, man, don't get us involved in your little charade. So let's go back to time travel and Sands of Time again, because what's happened is that you have people with super technology, and the reason the timeline has shifted or is different is because these people with super technology have been stabilizing the earth, because the real bad guys, the real black hat guys, I guess you could call it, the council or what have you, were fully planning on destroying populations on the planet to reduce the population to their Georgia Guidestones 500 million or so. And by the way, that's in the Billy Meyer stuff too. The Palladians talk about how the ideal population for a planet would be 500 million. And that, the 7 billion or 8 billion that we have is way too much. Well, screw them. It's that's their delusion that the people on the planet are. I mean, go fly across the middle part of the United States and tell me if it's
in the things that I tell my people, the number of 8 billion people on this world is considered very low. I actually think the number of this world is closer to 15 billion.
I mean, if you look at a travel guide of the United States and you look at Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, it's just blank pages. It's like there's nothing there.
Well, I can take that one step further. Is the United States, continental United States, is roughly the same size as Australia. However, here in Australia, we have the population of LA living here.
Yeah, 20
million. So, I'm sure, a third of it is desert, but you can still survive.
It's also the most stable landmass on the planet. It hasn't had a major earthquake in. That's why you've got amazing species, like koala bears and kangaroos and monkeys and things like that. I think
2 billion years old or something like that. And it's interesting enough. You've got and there's not much landmass above water in the southern hemisphere. And that's where I have to do more research in Pine Gap because I'm Australian. And when I talk to do shows like this, oh, you're Australian, you know about Pine Gap. I'm aware of it. Like I know, Sean, you'll know more about Pine Gap than I would.
I know years ago, I met a guy, and this is a weird thing. He was in Kellogg, Idaho, and he made wheels, giant metal wheels for mining equipment. I mean, we're talking wheels like the size of a football field. And I talked to this guy and I said, well, who do you make these for? He says, we don't really know. And he says, we're working 24/7. And it's like, we just sell them. And he says, they take them all down to Australia. And I said, what do they do? And he said, they're making they're putting some huge underground city together underneath Pine Gap. And this whole place is going to be, this will be where if there's an extraterrestrial invasion or if there's some kind of planetary shift, this is where all the rich people would run to these underground places. The only place that's bigger than the Pine Gap Alice Springs underground section is Yamanatu in Russia. And Yamanatu, you can put almost 10 million people in this underground thing. So if anybody thinks that Vladimir Putin's not ready for an atomic war, which would be started by the United States, they signed a treaty long ago that said they would never first strike with atomic weapons. And the United States is like, nope, we'll blow you up, we'll sneak up behind you and do whatever. But I can tell you that, let me just point out the various things that happened. The earthquake in Los Angeles, the 1994, the 1994 Northridge earthquake, it was completely artificial. Yep. And I can send you the newsletters where not only did I predict it, but I predicted the exact epicenter of the quake, the approximate date of the quake. I think I missed it by 10 days, and that the quake was going to be artificial, and it was. And what it was doing is it Edwards Air Force Base and a big top secret underground facility called the Anthill, which is built by Northrop. That's all up in the Antelope Valley, up against the hills, and they triggered the quake in Northridge to relieve the pressure on the San Andreas Fault. And you'll notice since that we have not had a single major earthquake in Southern California. Also, each one of these quakes, these are the guys at Cornell University figured this out. Each quake actually is, they're all 188 days apart. So if you look at the quakes in southern India, 188 days later, you had the quakes in Chile, in Bio, Chile. 188 days later, you had Christchurch in New Zealand. 188 days later, you had Fukushima. And by the way, Fukushima was triggered specifically to remove pressure on a fault line that was developing and becoming a huge quake, but right underneath Tokyo. So you've got a choice. If you're the masters of the universe and you're looking at Japan, and you know that there's going to be an earthquake that's going to split the island in half, wipe out Tokyo, millions of people, destroy one of the major economic infrastructures of the world, is it a big thing to sacrifice 16,000 people in an earthquake up in the north, which was all primarily agricultural? And I think it was a mistake because they didn't realize there were going to be that many people affected by the quake. If you'll notice, in Fukushima, not a single building was knocked over by the earthquake. They were all knocked over by the tidal wave that was the resulting thing of an atomic weapon that was used in the ocean that started it as a 6.0 quake and then was pounded by a HARP project. Basically, they just pounded it, made it bigger and bigger. But what that quake did is that not only did it only kill 1,600 people, but it stabilized the Japanese landmass of the 3 chain of islands. But it also moved the Earth by 6.5 to almost 9 inches. But it actually moved the nodal axis of the Earth. And each one of these quakes has moved the nodal axis of the planet so that we are more in line with galactic center. That's a big thing because the further we are out of alignment with that, the more we have a problem of the planet possibly flipping over. Go ahead.
Is that group related? Like the way, because if I'm remembering correctly, the group dabbles in this type of stuff to help save the planet.
Well, it's once again, they take their job very seriously, which is the defense of Earth from all threats, foreign and domestic, extraterrestrial and interdimensional. The whole thing of the book is they're going around closing up these holes in the dimension. Now, when the tall whites, or the Etherians as they call them, met with Eisenhower in February of 1953, and it wasn't friendly. They showed up at Muroc, or Edwards Air Force Base, and we sent up a bunch of fighters, and they just shot them down. And they landed and they said, we're gonna blow this whole place up unless you bring your leader here to us. So they grab Eisenhower off the golf course in Palm Springs. They take him over there and they said, here's how it's going to be. You know, number one, we know you landed on the moon. That's not going to happen again. This was January of 53. We used the National Security Agency, and which, by the way, if you type the word, try this. If you type the word Illuminati backwards into a search engine and hit the search button, you're taken to the website of the National Security Agency. So I think that's interesting. And actually, if you ask Alexa, some guys were asking Alexa, they said, or hey Siri, where did Joe Biden fall off his bicycle? And Siri will answer you, Joe Biden died in a naval hospital and something. It will tell you Joe Biden's dead, which I think is interesting. So the challenge of this is that they've shifted the timelines, and they shifted the timelines by, I think the biggest ones were the Landers earthquake in 92, June 28th of 92. That altered the timeline that had California sliding into the ocean, because that quake was actually rupturing. See, there you go. Did you type in Illuminati backwards? National Security Agency, Central Security Agent System Home, NSA cybersecurity.
Nothing sus there. Exactly.
U.S. national security. Well, remember what they call the NSA? They call it the Puzzle Palace. So
no such agent or no such agency.
No such agency. So you type in Illuminati backwards. Does nobody think that's weird?
Yeah.
So
NASA's never a straight answer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of my few
cocaine import agency.
Yeah. So if you look at the Landers quake, if you look at Fukushima, if you look at then a couple of years later, you have that. You have anyway that.
What about the Bondiachi tidal wave in the Christmas 2004?
Well, that one was, you talking about the one that wiped out a bunch of Thailand and India?
Yeah, Thailand, India, yeah.
Malaysia, okay. Yeah.
Well, here's where it's weird. That tidal wave is directly predicted by the Great Pyramid of Giza. I predicted it by analyzing the pyramid, because when you walk into the Well of Souls, which is about 151 feet below the main pyramid, and you go to the edge of the pit at the bottom, because if you're an initiate and you go to the edge of the pit and you're not paying attention, you fall right in it. But the entire chamber underneath the pyramid is a siege perilous. It's a water siege perilous. So when the initiate goes in, if he just falls into the pit because he's not aware, he'll die. But if he understands what he's doing, you turn right at the edge of the pit. The right at the edge of the pit is December 24th. If you actually do the measurements, it's December 24th of 2004, which is when that what they call the Fukushima quake, not Fukushima, sorry,
Bondiachi,
the Phuket quake, the one that wiped
out Phuket, Bondiachi, the same thing, yeah.
But interestingly enough, you can say a couple of things. First off, the Indians had kicked the U.S. military out of India, and so it happened right after that, where the Navy sat back and said, "Need our help now, Habu? Huh? Really?" And India said, "Okay," and they invited the U.S. Navy right back into India again after that, including whatever. But that timeline, and this is interesting, because that exact event, after my predicting it, saying if you look, there's going to be some kind of massive tidal wave that's going to kill hundreds of thousands of people. It killed 250,000 people, because I've studied the pyramid. I actually lived in Egypt when I was a kid. I went to school there. We did a $350,000 documentary that I wrote, which was called the Prophecy of the Pyramid. And but that event was like the last thing in the pyramid that it got right, because then you have this huge trough that comes from the back wall, which is called the River of Fire. And that was supposed to happen in 2012, and it didn't. So we're literally we're just floating free now, because again, it came down to somebody like me that was looking at stuff only a few years out. And let me mention this too, because the next thing that's going to happen is, I mean, I've got to talk about it. It might not be a big thing at all, but look at August 8th. And if you look at August 8th,
that's
which
is another Lionsgate day, and I, in my own cosmology, have said that the days of the Lionsgate are the moment where the ancient Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times," can become very real.
Well, if you figure out Vladimir Putin's born on October 1st. I'm born on October 1st. Interesting enough, he totally believes in astrology, and I predicted saying, because we're moving right now between February 22nd, which is when the war with Ukraine started, through December 24th, through Christmas Eve of 2024, we're moving through the Pluto transits. And if you look at each one of the Pluto transits, if you go all the way back, the United States on July 4th of 1776 was founded with Pluto at 27 degrees Capricorn. Well, what this was is that not only was it a breaking free, but it's one of the reasons why the British began to lose their empire, because that's Pluto underneath all the systems of government, constitutions, banking institutions. So he's down there with his scythe underground, basically just rupturing the foundations of all these things. So in this next 4 years, the reason they're talking about, I'm sorry, 2022, 3, 4, only 2 years. This is why they're talking about the Great Reset. This is why they're talking about the new banking system. This is all because this is all going to be regenerated and destroyed, because what Pluto destroys, he recreates. Yeah. So Putin chose that day, February 22nd, which was the Pluto transit of 27 degrees Capricorn, to attack Ukraine. Well, if I could figure it out, then other people could figure it out. There's people that know exactly what I know, and that took no big psychic thing, but that happened, the attack on Donbass and whatever else, where they finally got tired of poked by this little freaking transvestite Nazi, Zelensky. And by the way, you know what happened to the 60-some billion dollars we sent to Ukraine? Zelensky's stolen it all, all of it. So here's another prediction for you. Everything's going to center around Kaliningrad. Why is Kaliningrad important? I've been telling people that, for months now, Kaliningrad is the big deal. Well, what's happening now? You've got submarines from the United States, from UK, from France, from everywhere around the world are all gathering at Kaliningrad. The reason for this is because what the Russians have threatened is another event very much like Fukushima, with what they call the tsunami torpedo. And that he's kept saying is, if you want to take on Russia, the war with Europe will last 200 seconds. Have you heard that?
The actual Russian premier, not Zavrov, whatever he was, Lavrov, said that.
Yeah. And
one torpedo will create a tsunami, which will done, and it's something we've known about since the early Cold War.
Right.
And all of Europe wiped out with a 150 meter water wall. Yes. And the same thing to the United States.
Before that happens, I think what's going to happen is that I think that Zelensky is going to be assassinated with all of his top people. They're going to get them all together. It's going to be a strike that they're going to blame on the Russians. It's not going to be the Russians.
Right, that's America clearing house to make sure nothing tracks back.
Well, nothing tracks back, and to basically punish Zelensky for stealing $60+ billion. All that money.
Because he didn't follow the globalist plan. He stole from the globalists.
Yeah, I actually saw an article that high level.
This is where corruption. I'm sorry, Monty. This is where corruption bangs the globalists in the ass. They got the greediest Ukrainian in the world, and they trusted him.
Yeah, but there was an article that senior Ukrainian officials are buying up all these houses in Switzerland. It was like, where did you get the money from?
That's very good. It's very good. Well, all that money, by the way, it was supposed to also go to Nancy Pelosi because she's the one that runs the company that sells Javelin missiles. And so so when you screw over Nancy Pelosi, although they had those weird pictures of it, do you realize Nancy Pelosi had those giant boobs? Anyway.
Those are Grandma Saggers, and that she's just got like kickstands holding up.
I'm still trying to block it out, gentlemen. Please, can we move on?
So August 8th, this whole thing. By the way, today is a very auspicious day because you have the sun moving into Leo. You have the moon in Leo as well, so it's a new moon today. So supercharged, super powered as far as royal personalities. I mean, you're going to see. I think you're going to see the death or removal of the queen. It's already happening, where she's handing everything over to Charles, who nobody likes. He thought that she was going to get rid of Charles and go right to William, who looks exactly like George Washington, which I think is weird because he's related. He's like the great grand nephew of George Washington. And
can I add another layer too? Because part of what I've done since early January is to do the non-psychic predictions, kind of something what you're doing. It's basic knowledge and wisdom and putting together the patterns. That whenever we have a death, like let's say the Queen of England, it always comes in threes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 2 other famous people in the world will die within a few months also.
Well, if you again, Pluto,
Mhm.
and the death of kings and all that. I mean, you've had the resignation of Boris Johnson. You've
Mhm.
had the resignation of I think it's Drago in Italy.
Yep.
You've had the if you look at what's going on, you've got
Shinzo Abe assassinated.
Yep, Shinzo Abe is killed, if he was, because he got shot twice and he only flinched once, which I think is weird. But if you look at all these world leaders, they're all being removed.
Yep.
And what are they being removed for? And in my books, again, and then, remember the manuscript was delivered to me in the spring of 2009, and so all these things that I was writing about are sort of from back then. And obviously, the next 3 books is when all the time travel sequence will be revealed, all the future stuff. Book 1 is out now. If you go to my website, strangeuniverseradio.com, we're almost sold out of the collector's edition hardcover of Time Runner. We've already sold the rights for it to become a film or a major TV series like X-Files. So that's a good thing. And but the best is yet to come, because it explains time travel, how they do it, how they dance between the raindrops, as they call it, when they move into this process, and what's going to go down between now and 2024. And it's going to be I mean, I knew about Space Force years in advance. I knew that the weird part is that I saw Trump winning the 2020 election, but not serving, because I knew that whoever got in 2020 is going to die. And, and Biden is about ready to be either removed, to either resign, or just, flat out fall over dead. That's why I thought it was interesting that he talked about having cancer from oil in Delaware. And, now he's got COVID. And then you saw what completely looked to me like 2 different people on 2 different days.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, being edited, and every 20 seconds, the end of every sentence that was edited, and the camera was moving backwards and forwards. And then he gives a fairly cogent speech today where it's a completely different guy. I mean, it's like, on the one thing he's all tan, the other one he's all pale. The nose was different, but it was a guy that actually stringed 2 sentences together. So August 8th is going to be most interesting, because again, the prediction before it was significant enough to begin the first phases of a World War III kind of thing. And it's going to be a question as to whether or not the Russians back off, which, by the way, Putin always has in every situation where he's had a chance to make peace, whether it was in Syria, whether or not it was in former Soviet Georgia, whether or not in every single case. It's interesting, because when Putin pulled all of his nuclear missiles out of Eastern Europe, it was George Bush that rushed in with this, and Putin made the comment that Bush was like a crazy man, slashing everybody with a razor, and that ever since Gandhi died, I don't have anybody to talk to. That's what he said.
And that's that whole neocon double down on every dumbass action they do.
Right. And the challenge is going to be is that if push came to shove and the United States went at it with the Russians or the Europeans, we're going to get our asses kicked. I mean, seriously kicked. And you'll notice that nobody has blown up the bridges in Ukraine, because it might be a preparation for a final push for Putin to just take over the entire country, move all the way through it to the western border, and then back off and say, okay, let's make a treaty. You give us the Donbass regions, which were ethnically Russian in the first place, which still do legally belong to Russia. Ukraine is not a nation state, because they never declared themselves one when they had the chance to in 1991 and 92.
So, a lot of people don't realize the head of Russian naval forces was in Ukraine. The naval base that built all their nuclear aircraft carriers was in Ukraine. Ukraine was the center of the military forces and training systems for all officers.
That's right. So how's that going to come down? It's going to come down where the Russians are going to kick ass, but it's going to it's not going to happen all at once on the 8th, but it's the fulcrum point for where the teeter totter.
It's the time when the many straws break the many camels' backs.
Correct. Very good. Very well put. Very well put. So that's where we're at now. As far as the Sands of Time series goes, what you learn about is that the group specifically, as I said, it's closing up the dimensional rifts. It's stopping the things that are coming in towards us into our space. And as far as the political stuff goes, I think what's happening is you're seeing all these political moves to the point of where they tried to trick the people to thinking they voted for him. And now Biden just come out and said, no, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. I can't believe you didn't go for my completely crap, fake climate nonsense, which nobody cares about. They care about, food on the table. They care about the price of gas. They care about the inflation. it's funny, he has a whole plan to stop inflation today. How about stop printing money? How about stop spending money, stop printing money? But now we're moving into a recession. Why? Because the only way you can get rid of inflation is to raise all the interest rates to make sure there's less money available. And that's like a big revelation. You know, it's economics 101, that if you make something scarce, it becomes more valuable. If you stop printing the money becomes more valuable. And the great reset that they're talking about, which Trump might possibly do when he and DeSantis come back in 2024. And I think the perfect move would be for Trump to run for president, DeSantis as vice president, because then the Republicans would actually control the executive branch for the next 12 years, which would be the wisest thing for them to do. But they're also going to clean house on the voting machines, finally. And I don't know why people don't understand that Bill Barr is one of the biggest scumbags walking the earth, and that he covered up Waco, he covered up Ruby Ridge, he covered up Iran Contra. He's the big cover-up guy.
He's the bad guy. He's the one that puts everything in the black bag.
Right. And it's and I don't know what Trump did in his presidency, because he trusted all the people that he shouldn't. He took Henry Kissinger's advice on everything. And the minute Kissinger meets with anybody, there's a change. There's a weird, flux in time space. So
that's one thing I noticed with Trump was it what, the first 6-7 weeks when he was president, he went around keeping promises, and then I'm sure he had a meeting and everything changed. Right. You can actually see in that timeline, like in a recorded history type thing, not actually a timeline. But Trump, he was keeping promises and making things better, blah, blah, blah. And then, went home on Friday, came back on Monday, and different Trump completely.
And that was the weekend that he met with Kissinger and went and kissed Kissinger's ring. And what was the one promise that Donald Trump did not keep that I think led to his impeachment, led eventually to his loss? What was the one promise? The biggest thing. It was a campaign slogan. Remember when people were chanting it?
Lock her up.
That's right. Yeah. And he did go after the witch queen. And because he didn't do that, because she had stuff on all the Republicans and the Democrats as well. She was throwing sex parties, and if you couldn't find a date, he would get some general or prostitute or whatever.
Also, they were very big into their early genome project, and a lot of the Clinton Foundation dollars came from that, which is the initial gene programs that were to map the entire human genome, and then licensing out specific genetic models for viruses.
Well, and then remember they looted Haiti as well. They used the whole Haiti earthquake thing, which was another one of those induced earthquakes by the oil companies that split Haiti in half, and they stole all that money from the Haitians and kidnapped a bunch of Haitian children and got caught doing it. So every person I've ever known that's interacted with her has said she's a monster. She's an absolute monster. She's a bag of flesh that's filled with more. We should just call her Legion. Yes. Hillary Legion.
I remember David Icke when the last time he was here in Australia, I think it was 2015 when he was allowed in. I remember this quote, out of 8 hours of him talking, which Icke is fantastic doing his presentations, like this is taking forever. But he said, I would call Hillary Clinton evil, but I don't want to be sued by evil for defamation.
That's funny. So anyway, with the Sands of Time books, again, everybody's remarked that they're fabulously well written. They're the best disclosure document out there. It's it's all the truth. It's all the scientific stuff. Again, it was enough. It was, it was enough to get the federal government to come after me. And the guy that gave me the manuscripts in the first place said, they're going to come after you, man. You messed with Area 51. You put Area 51 on the front page of the paper. You filmed it for the first time. You forced them to move a multi-billion-dollar base to Utah because everything's up in a place called Kings Peak in the Uinta National Forest, and
which is irony, which is where all the center of so much UFO is actually happening in the Uinta Basin.
Well, the other weird thing is that let me solve one more mystery for you. I went out to Skinwalker Ranch some years ago, and this is once again 2015, 2014. And thank you, you gave me the name, but Travis, what was the guy's name again?
Travis Walton.
No, not Travis Walton.
Snowflake,
Arizona.
hang on. I'll check.
Oh no, you gave me his name.
Travis Taylor. We mentioned it.
Taylor,
we only
yeah.
mentioned it yesterday.
Yeah. So Travis Taylor was on a webcast. It was like the Bubba and Jed University or something. There were a couple of like redneck guys looking into mysteries, and they actually had Travis Taylor on there. And I called up the Discovery Channel guys, or the History Channel guys at Discovery, because I had a lot to do with the first 3 seasons of Ancient Aliens. And I said, look, I figured it out. I've remote viewed this entire area. I can tell you what's there. And they're like, oh, no, thanks. We found a guy. And so I went out there. I went to the fence. They wouldn't let us in at the time that I was out there with my wife. And one of the things we found was if you can see them and tune into the frequency, they look like diamonds. They look like kites actually just floating in the air with an energy pulsing out from the center. And I said, you see each one of these, they're dimensional doors. And so anyway, remote viewing the site, what's there to break it? And it was interesting because Travis was on the TV, and I'm jumping up and down with my wife saying, I told you all this before, that this is a shift. It's about 1,500 feet around, and it's a ship, and this thing crashed, which creates this big gully. And there's an edge of a small cliff there. It's where all the earth kind of gathered up. But there's beings actually, and I don't know, it's millions of years. I don't know if it goes back to the war 65 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs, because that was a war. And it was created dimensional rifts, and it was the tall whites that we call the Lyrans. They tried weapons on the planet that created things like the Grand Canyon. Exact same layout as the giant canyon rift on Mars, because the war went from one planet to another. But there's beings actually trapped in the computer, I think, their consciousness, and they're all yelling help when you tune into it. So Travis Taylor just flips me out, because every time you threaten that structure, if you send something up into the air or something down into the ground, it triggers a defense mechanism. And I'm watching the show, and they kept sending these like little skyrockets, fireworks up in the air. Every time they did it, within the course of 30 minutes, you had 3 saucers that actually came in to check out and see what was going on. And at the same time, if you dig down, all the cattle run from one end of the ranch to another and gather by this fence under a tree, because there's a defense signal that's being processed, and the engines are still on, whatever this thing is, and it's creating an interdimensional rift, exactly like the Atlantean power pyramid in the Bermuda Triangle. When it's sunny on this side and the sun gets down to the pyramid itself is about 1,600 feet high, and it's been photographed by the space shuttle a number of times when the water's not murky and the sun is out. And so Atlantis had three power pyramids at the edges of the planet that were processing the kinetic energy of the Earth and the sun through the top of the capstone, and they would transmit electromagnetic frequencies that would power everything in Atlantis. And when the final destruction came, I mean, because Atlantis collapsed from the edges and moved into another dimension that they call the purple dimension, and there's still people there, and there's still civilization and all kinds of stuff, because people have seen it and actually flown through it and come out the other side. So anyway, so it was just interesting to see Travis actually on a web show finally exposing all the secrets of what's down there, which I'd been talking about for years. And they have now scientifically confirmed. And by the way, saw the show where he did this. He had, oh my God, it's my wife. He had a device that when he tuned it into whatever frequency it was that the ship was going on the device were the words, help me, help me, help me, over and over and over again. So there's something there that needs to be rescued. And there's
I have my own little view to it. It is something I've talked about a long time, especially with Stardust Ranch and Blind Frog Ranch also having very similar processes going on there. That there are what I call timeline fallout shelters, and that the ship itself is a shelter protected from that zero wave of time you were talking about before, the time erasure wave.
Right.
And then they can't get back out because they don't have a link to new time other than through trans-dimensional communication, which is manipulating objects on the other side of this reality. And the system, the automated response system, is something that was put there a long time ago, so those people wouldn't be able to get out of their timeline fallout shelter.
Wow, interesting. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's what the
Hey, at this point, each and every one of us could be right, and it's not about who's right or wrong. It's about sharing as many ideas and
Right.
getting as many pattern recognitions as possible. You know, you and I differ on view, but ultimately in the end, it's the same thing. We're all going towards the same thing. We're just having a different verbal story together. That's why I said, let's sit around the campfire and tell our stories for people to begin to make the greater pattern recognition, because everyone has something powerful to say.
Well, I don't know how much time we have.
We got about another 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think once again, I think what's been happening is that the group has altered the timeline by understanding the catastrophes as they're coming from a scientific viewpoint, and has done everything they can to alter these catastrophes, like California not falling into the ocean, Los Angeles not being destroyed. I mean, I can tell you for a fact that if there were ever atomic weapons or missiles or something coming at Los Angeles, there's a dome that comes up, an anti-gravity dome that basically comes up from Santa Barbara, goes all the way down to San Diego, because you can't lose LA, because LA is it's literally the epicenter of the military, industrial, entertainment, pharmaceutical complex, which is
But there's more thing. There's a collective belief energy around it that also makes it needed to be protected, because we live in a world of harvested belief, whether it's harvested by on worlds, off worlds, or isn't harvested, or is made for ourselves through the own karmic system, whatever way you want to describe it. We have this journey to awaken. There are those that don't want us, that want to delay it as long as possible or stop it completely. There's always going to be those of us that wake up, stay awake, and keep passing it on to the next generation, as the generations before did to us. Passed on what? Passion to research. Had you not had the passions to do and research at a young age, you wouldn't be here today with the great stories you have.
Thank you. Well, I've been curious. It's just stay curious, people. You know, try to.
Who better than Sean David Morton?
That's right. And my motto is never turn down an adventure, because you know what it's like sitting in the house, right, Monty?
Exactly.
I chose this life for a reason. Now, if you could tell me what that reason is, everything would be better.
You never turn down an adventure. My grandma just said, "Get out, shove me out of the house, and lock all the doors, you know, so we could get back in."
Yeah,
drink out of the hose. Drink out of the hose.
Greek. I grew up in a Greek family too, so when I got the boot, it's don't come back till dinner.
yeah, exactly. I'm locking the doors. Go drink out of the hose.
Exactly.
So it's crazy. And let me tell you one other story, if I can tell you the story. It's once again, it's Carrie Cassidy, and well, there's a lot of people out there that have, you know, that talk about the white hats and the black hats and all this. And I was the one guy that was coming out. I mean, you guys know who Juan O'Savin is, right?
Yeah. Well.
Okay. So
I hate that guy. I'm sorry.
Well, I know he was a friend of mine years ago, and you know, or Wayne Willie is his actual name. And I was the first person when I got out of prison. I mean, this is like 5 days out. I get a call from him, from Wayne, and it's really weird. And he's like, you know, "Hey man, don't out me, man. Don't tell people who I am." And I was like, "Why would I do that?" And I didn't realize he had this entire cult around him and the whole thing. And I was like, "Well, you know, you haven't done me any good, but I'll tell you what, you're good friends with Trump, right?" "Oh yeah, I'm best friends with Trump." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm down in Mar-a-Lago. I'm playing golf with him, all that other stuff." And I said, "Well, look, I've got a pardon sitting on his desk. So
tell him to sign that shit."
What's that? Sorry.
Tell him to sign that.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, I've got, and this is the absolute truth. The president had 10,000 requests for pardons on his desk, which he could have signed, could have let everybody go. When they passed the First Step Act was a joke. It only freed 3,300 people. The people he freed were almost exclusively black, because it commuted the sentences for people who were on crack. And by the way, Joe Biden, with his crime bill, he's the one that put all these black guys in there, by the way.
That's right. That's
his crime bill, which had the 15 to 20 years for crack possession. They just played stuff on the TV saying, if you're caught with a thing of crack, and they're intermixing it with Hunter, his son, with a mountain of crack, and all these other people that went to prison. And of the 3,300 people that it freed, 1,500 of them were illegal aliens, and so went right to ICE and were deported from the country. Everybody else was black. All the white guys are in there for meth. So I don't see how meth is more dangerous than crack. I haven't done either one. And he had 50,000 requests for commutation of sentence. Didn't sign one. And then, of course, he was going to sign the ones for Snowden and Julian Assange. Didn't sign those either because he got threatened by Mitch McConnell. And McConnell said, if you sign pardons for those guys, I will have my 18, 19 butt boys in the Senate all vote to impeach you. And he walked away from the whole thing. That gives you an idea of what moral courage Donald Trump has.
Yeah.
And I said to Wayne, I said, have him sign my pardon, man, if you're all connected. And he's like, oh, that's for later down the line. I'm like, what are you talking about? Later down the line, he lost the election. I know it was fraudulent, but he didn't do anything about it thanks to your buddy Bill Barr. And he's like, oh no, he'll be, I guarantee you, he'll be reinaugurated as president on January 20th. I was like,
yeah,
okay.
Listen, Monty and I were doing live shows leading up to that. And I had called out Juan and every one of those other Q-Tardians. That's one of the nicknames that I gave them about how ridiculous they had become.
Yes, indeed. And they continued on. And the thing we couldn't understand is that the one guy that Obama and all of his top staff were really afraid of was Michael Flynn. And I mean, they concocted an entire conspiracy to take down Flynn before, on the last day, their very last meeting in the White House was about how do we stop Michael Flynn? And then Michael Flynn just swallowed the bowl of porridge, I guess, along with McHenry and all these other guys. And so I became a black hat because I was saying, this is not how it works. He's not going to be put back in as president. The vote doesn't matter. It's the
the vote doesn't matter.
It's the certification of the Electoral College. And if they manage to alter the Electoral College, then you're done. And oh no, it's going to be March 3rd. Oh no, he's only the 24th president of the United States. Oh no, now it's going to be August. And I kept calling these guys out, going, "You're all a bunch of fools." And how do you get away with just lying to people and constantly being wrong? And
so
still,
you were not fully aware of how Q took over social media and how truly divisive it became.
Okay, unfortunately, I know who Q is.
It doesn't matter. He's a moron.
I know, and he's a rich Republican who lives in Bel Air, who sponsors a bunch of Republican events. So anytime you see a big Republican event in Southern California, Q is there and he's behind it. And it's interesting because when people started catching on to who he is, like me, suddenly he just disappears. Now he's back with all these cryptic little, Nostradamus quatrains, of what's going to happen.
Because he's trying to use the power of myth a second time. And that's the reason Q, as I will actually call it, half magical cyber op. There was absolutely magical practitioners influencing data servers to trigger people to suck this information up and just give up on what they believed in.
I don't give him that much credit. I think that he knew Trump, he knew people inside the Republican
Party. No, not that actual person. The people that view time and know there'll be actors throughout the story or narrative, and they will put an energy behind that narrative actor without them even knowing.
Okay, I agree with that. I'm just saying, knowing who the guy is and understanding how you're right, he moved into the realm of myth, if you will.
Yeah, the realm of myth, which is the power people fill in the blanks and create things.
Well, the one thing that I pointed out, I wrote a whole article called "The Death of Hopium," and it's on my it's on my Facebook page, and I think I coined the term hopium some time ago. But it was there's a great special, considering we just talked about Sam Neill and James Mason and all that stuff. There's a great special that was on BBC. And it was called Riley, Ace of Spies. And if you ever get a chance to watch it, it's fantastic because it's oh, okay, well, all right, thank you, that was quick. But what I talk about in there, the cosmic Super Bowl that I put in, the multiverse is about to begin, and as I said, the big bad guys, the white hats and the black hats, and I started being accused of being one of the black hats, simply because I was presenting the reality of what was going to happen rather than the mythology of it. And so long story short, if you get the series Riley, Ace of Spies, Sidney Riley, who was with SD1, which was the first part of the British Secret Service, he came inches away. I mean, there's a famous end to a scene where there was a crazy woman who shot Lenin at a beer factory. And had she not done that, Sidney Riley was going to take over the Russian government. He was going to become the leader of Russia. And because he had everybody in place, he had the Latvian guards, he had everybody ready to overthrow the Bolsheviks. And it didn't happen because this woman shot Lenin, and Lenin went crazy and started executing everybody. What happened is that directly after the revolution, with money from Henry Ford, with money from Carnegie, with running from all these big industrialists in the United States, Stalin and Felix Dzerzhinsky, who was the head of the Cheka, which was the precursor to the KGB, started an organization that they called the Trust. And after I pulled this out, everybody started talking about it as well. But the Trust was set up to look as though it was an anti-revolutionary movement. And Riley was the only one that, I sort of sympathized with him. He was the only one that said, this is all fake. It's all fake. And it's being set up by Stalin. And you can't believe this. And he gave his life, actually, because he went back into Russia, appeared as the representative of the British government, saying, you're not going to get any money until we see you actually do something. And what he challenged him to do is he said, I want power stations blown up. I want railways exploded. I want you to disrupt the train system. And eventually, at the very end of his talk, and he says, and I demand you assassinate Joseph Stalin. And when that information got back to Stalin, he lost his mind. And he said, I'm not going to let this guy wander around. I'm not letting this revolutionary thing that's dedicated to overthrow me. And they arrested Sidney Riley. And eventually, many people think that he died in Siberia. And they made it look as though he was escaping, going across the border to Finland when they shot him. But that was the only thing that broke the power of the Trust and broke the power of this supposedly anti-Bolshevik organization that turned out to be a Bolshevik organization. This is what these people are. This is what, and it's disgusting that you have people like Michael Flynn and General McHenry and Wayne Williott and this whole mythology about
wasn't Flynn in charge of Flynn in charge of the Cyber Command?
Yeah, and again, he was the only.
He's the one that has the metaphorical access codes to the AIs.
Correct.
And knows how to work them.
He had access and control, supposedly, over the entire Five Eyes organization, which is why Obama saw him as such a threat.
Yeah.
But he gets threatened once with whatever it was. He goes up against this DC judge who then becomes the prosecutor in his case. And when he gets cold feet, he gets a yellow belly. It's very weird to watch all these guys turn.
I think that whatever they had on Flynn, he had enough to counter it. And the story had to play out in the public, and they just let the story play out in the public. And whatever time he did inside, it was not time. It was still a Cyber Command.
Yeah, it kind of did, and he was completely nullified. And and it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen, because I don't even want to call them Democrats. The totalitarianists are going to pull every trick in the book to try to alter the midterm election, in which you're going to get.
You mean the Republicrats?
Yeah, the Republicrats. Yeah, and again, the real challenge is going to be, now you're going to have to worry about the traitors on the inside, which are people like Mitch McConnell. And
so let's put a little focus, since we only got a few minutes left on the show, on the upcoming midterm election. What are your views on it?
Well, I mean, it'll be a wipeout, and people seem to forget that when Obama got in 2010. It was called the shellacking. It was the greatest overturn of the Congress in 60 years, where suddenly the Republicans gained control of both the Senate and the House. And once again, how were they thwarted? Once they got Trump in there, they were thwarted by Mitch McConnell. They were thwarted by Paul Ryan. They were thwarted by the insider Republicans themselves. Now the demon rats only control the House by 6, and they've already got 29 Democrats who are retiring, just leaving, just because they're reading the writing on the wall. So now you're probably going to look at a flip. Conservatively, you're looking at 60. Liberally, you're looking at probably 80 new Republicans. Then you're going to have to worry about Steve Scalise. You're going to worry about the people who are the leaders in the Republican Party, who are sounding just like Democrats. That's the problem. 2024, what's going to happen? If Ron DeSantis steps forward, he doesn't tweak the noses and pull up levers of the media like Trump does. but Trump has control of the PACs. He has control of the money. So the wise thing to do would be, if they can put their egos aside, which, remember, we're talking about DeSantis and Trump, that if Trump takes on DeSantis as vice president, and already Trump is intimating that, well, I might not run because of my health. Then if you have Trump as president, DeSantis as vice president, then at any time Trump could just resign, hand the whole thing over to DeSantis, and then the Republicans would control the executive branch for easily in the next 12 years. But if you look at their control over riots, if you look at the Democratic control, I mean, the George Soros control, look at what's happening. They're creating the chaos. Everything that you see happening now is to create the same situation as Germany in the 20s, which led to Adolf Hitler. Because what's it going to be? It's all going to be about law and order. Why is George Soros creating mass chaos in the cities? Once again, it's going to be about law and order, defunding the police. What happened at the same time? You had the banks basically go belly up. You had all kinds of crazy things with the banks, so that the interest rates were so high that the average German man had to work 12-hour days and only keep 2 hours of that labor because, again, of the banks. And the banks were, oddly enough, run by the Jews. And so therefore, that's why Hitler managed to make scapegoats out of the Jews, because they didn't have to go to the war in the First World War. And they came back and they bought everybody's houses. And so he had a class that was easy to pick on. And again, it's never been about the Jews. It's about the Jews actually controlling the money of the royal families, of the council that sits above everybody, the council that's turning everybody into their own personal farm crop. So that's the goal. And ultimately, I mean, let's talk about it. If you look in the end of the Bible is an intergalactic war that's against the forces of the Archangel Michael versus the Red Dragon versus the forces of Alpha Draconis, or the Alpha Draconian Empire. That's what Al Bielek talked about. That's what the guys who come back from the future talked about. That's what all these guys talked about. And it's right there. It's right there in the Bible, for goodness sakes. If the positive side comes out, you're going to have it. And I really wish this white hat stuff about, Hillary's been executed at Gitmo, and she said, you can't do this to me because I'm a Clinton, and Trump's at the bottom of the stairs going, this is happening, bitch. These fantasies that these guys make up.
Exactly, fantasies. And for years, we've heard even worse ones. Monty, what was the one right after Trump lost, that it was like the movie Face Off, that Biden and Trump had face exchange surgery?
Yeah, that's basically the example I have is this someone on a YouTube channel saying this in pure seriousness, that Biden and Trump had swapped faces like the movie Face Off, and so Biden is actually Trump and Trump is actually Biden. Now the thing is, Biden could fit into Trump like a mechanoid. But that was the level of craziness of trying to justify. No, it's real.
Wasn't there a Doctor Who episode where he had guys working, little mini guys that work in the robots that were doing weird things? Wasn't it?
Yes. Strangely enough, that episode is called "Let's Kill Hitler," where that robot is dimensionally. There's it's the size of me, but there's 1,000 people inside the robot because they're being compressed, and they go through time administering justice for certain people. So they, from their perspective, they think they got away with it, but they actually kill the person, become the robot, and then sort of drift out of history.
That's cool. And actually, I have to tell you this because I asked Ted Humphrey, the ultimate time travel question. I said, why didn't you guys just go back and kill Hitler? That would have been interesting. And he said, we did 3 times. And he says, 3 times. He says the first time Hans Kammler took over with the super weapons and whatever else. The second time you had Rudolf Hess. And he says the third time it was the German High Command. And each time the Germans won the war. And
because Hitler was doing more damage than good.
Yeah, and he says the only thing that stopped the Germans from winning the war was that Hitler was crazy. And I thought that this was a complete nonsensical. I'm like, you're just putting me off. Then they find a coin in Mexico. And I'm not sure if you've seen it. You could probably find it on the internet. But this coin in Mexico that has the Nazi eagle, it has it in its claws. It's got the Nazi swastika with the laurel leaves on it. And it basically talks about the Germanic Republic of Mexico. And it's dated 2039 AD. And they actually found this coin in Mexico. And I thought, that's once again a Mandela effect. And this is another reason why so many people are being inundated by this, because each time they shift the timeline. And I'm gonna end this by telling you that I didn't finish the rest of the story of what happened at Hal Wilcox's place. After they tell us this big story about the timeline had shifted, and that's why we needed to get Rajneesh Gurdjieff, and they were allowed to shift the timeline. And I said, well, that's interesting, because, and then I asked about the bigger timeline shift, and they talked about them changing the outcome of the battle of the Spanish Armada. Well, this is going to sound completely crazy, but it was. We left that meeting, and I grew up with the sign on the hill saying Hollywood Land, and we all came out of the meeting and we all freaked out because his house was right at the bottom of that sign, and it just said Hollywood on it. It didn't say Hollywood Land. And what they told us, what Faj told us, he said, if you do what we say, if you do the proper meditation, you needed a meditation group of 6 men and 6 women to be able to change time, to be able to do what they call the shell meditation. And they said, if you do what we say, there will come a time when you will walk out of this room and the whole world will be at peace. There'll be travel to other planets and other galaxies. There'll be peace on Earth. There'll be peace in the stars. And the only people will know that it was any different will be you. And people have nervous breakdowns from that, but it's also a plan of hope, because a lot of people whose brains are not wired a certain way, they will remember the previous timeline. And of course, when you're out of sync like that, when what you have experienced and believe, we've got whole buildings full of people like this, which they call sanitariums and nut houses, where people who are living a different reality than everybody else. But once again, it's like a splinter in your mind that it's not supposed to be the way it is, and that there's a way to change it back. And that's all I have to say on that.
It's not hopium. It's a challenge to create passion to do in yourself, and to make that practice solid, real now for yourself.
Yep.
Anybody that's been following any faith-based practice knows you can do that.
Yes.
That's not willing an apple into creation. It's knowing to plant the apple tree so I have apples for the rest of my life.
Well, and that's what everybody has to remember, that's what angels are for. Everybody gets an apple. Yeah. Every religion is universally talks about angels who do not have a will of their own, but they are forced. Even demons, by the way, have to serve the magician to a positive end, because they're like the mailman. It doesn't matter if the mailman worships Satan; he still has to deliver your mail.
Yeah. One of the phrases I coined early on in 2012 is we live under what I call a light dictatorship.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not the dark running everything. It's the light demanding what everything happens and imposing its perception of judgment on those that aren't following the greater plan.
Well, every cycle we have, the biblical cycles, the astronomical cycles, the cycles of Pluto, the economic cycles, all end in the next 3 years. So, and then everything floats into chaos. And let me give you another interesting thing. When you study the Great Pyramid enough, the pyramid says that the period we're in now is the Great Exodus. And the Exodus lasts 40 years, from February 22nd of 1999, which, by the way, is when we started aligning with the Pleiades, when the sun began to align with the Pleiades. It's also at the same time we developed the 13th sign of the zodiac, which is now it moves. It's called Amboros, where it's actually the foot of Merlin. So there's a 13th sign of the zodiac at that time, which is now the releasing of the magical power in each one of us. And that we go into the state of flux where you have, as part of the plan, massive numbers of the population dying, so that you can clear the room so that the next thing can start. And things get so bad.
There's a big backload of souls who are owed lives and time here.
This is correct, which is also why abortion is so heinous, because there's so many beings trying to get in on this planet to experience the final exam and the final graduation. And in 2034, this is in the pyramid now, even though we've missed the river of fire, but things get so bad that there's on September 17th of 2034 is what they call the day of appearance. So what I've seen is that every UFO, every mothership, everything in this area of space, all the watchers become visible for one day. and they readjust the orbit of the planet. They clean out the atmosphere, and they just disappear. They're like the highway patrol, or as I call them, the way high patrol. And the way high patrol comes in, clears the wreck in the road, and this eventually clears the way for the predicted birth. It predicted the birth of Christ in 2 BC. It predicted the birth of Buddha in 600 BC. And the next Messiah, actually, it triangulates where Christ was going to be born within 100 feet of the cave in the Nativity in Bethlehem, and it predicts if you take those same lines out to the west, it predicts that the next Messiah comes and is either born or appears, or we still haven't figured it out yet, but it happens on October 31st of 2039, and that's when the next Messiah is either born or appears or what have you. And it's interesting because the reason it's Halloween is because Halloween, or All Saints Day, is the celebration of the return of the souls of the dead. And that means that everybody that was born before that got cleared out is going to start to reincarnate. And then the whole planet is rebuilt and everything's beautiful. And we're basically a paradise by the year 2055. And we all live happily ever after. How's that to end the show?
See, I ironically, my own thing is right around 2050 is where you can get multiple citizenships to other places, spaces, and densities and realities. But you go through a journey of learning how to manifest and unmanifest a body, some of the greater spiritual practices that are innate in the human DNA.
That's going to happen.
Yep.
Very much.
And
so.
other things are gonna come live here. And there are a lot of beings out there that don't need physical bodies. They can live between the spaces of atoms. So the amount of people that can live in a world is unlimited.
Amen.
Sean, outstanding conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
And
Just a wealth of knowledge.
Shucks. Well, thanks for having Monty on too, because Monty and I are buddies, and it's nice. And where are you at? Where do you live?
I do live right outside of Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh my goodness, a great spiritual vortex.
Oh yeah, it is. Let me tell you, I've seen more UFOs charge up over the lake on thunderstorms than I even could begin to tell you.
Well, go Bengals.
The Browns suck this year. Don't worry.
Oh, I'm sorry. They always suck, don't they?
They always suck. Exactly. They've sucked since the 1989.
Yeah.
So that was a good opening salvo. So obviously we'll have to do this again.
So, Sean, we also have a comedy show that's every other Friday. If you ever just want to come in and talk comedy shop and make fun of reality, you're more than welcome to come on.
Okay, I gotta get out all my stand-up comedy routines. I got a bunch. I was going to create an entire character called Dexter Manfred, and Dexter was going to be like a scientist on the run from Area 51, and come out and tell a bunch of.
We could get a voice changer for you, so we can make it a little better.
Andrew, that actually goes well with our Gary and Barry, because we've got Gary the Grey and Barry the Reptile, so that kind of works.
There you go. Yeah, my voice is unfortunately already changing. This is not what my voice usually sounds like. So
yeah,
but I'm gonna be this was sort of the last hurrah here, because it looks like I'm going into radiation next week.
Yeah,
which is not
well,
so
Sean, all of our prayers are with you.
Thank you.
Once again, you want to give people your website and where they can go and buy your books?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. Just go to strangeuniverseradio.com. It was just like the TV show that I started in actually I had the first TV show. I started the Sci-Fi Channel. We had the first original show on the Sci-Fi Channel. We started UPN, which is now the CW with that was Strange Universe. And then so welcome to Strange Universe Radio. This is just strangeuniverseradio.com, where you can also go on what is it? We have a nightly show that Monty is the producer of, and that's just revolution.radio, not com or web or anything like that, but revolution.radio. And that is 10 p.m. Pacific time until midnight Pacific, which is, do your time adjustments. But yeah, Revolution Radio, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight, which the
on Studio B.
The young golden prince right here is Monty, and he's probably going to take it over at some point. So he's the best.
So Monty, you want to give a way for people to get a hold of you?
Wafer Thin Entertainment. It can be found on Rumble, as well as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And in about an hour, I'm taking my mum to the bank.
Would you like a wafer? It's a thin wafer.
And you all know who I am. You can go to my website, andrewbartzis.com. Find me Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and all those other wonderful places. We will be back next Friday with our live comedy show. And we remind everyone, our comedy shows, we intend to offend. This is where you take the serious stick out of your ass and piss all over everything and have a blast.
Beat yourself.
All right.
Thank you.
Exactly. Catch you later, everyone. Hang around for a second, Sean.
Okay. Bye.
Each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge. It's the Holy Grail. Improvise. Mysterious. It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.
Hello, let's create, let's co-create, and let's change this world with love. No matter if you're from Alpha Centauri or Earth, we all began with the same birthing process. We live in a limited point of view. Living the mystical life daily is about striving for the unlimited point of view. Each day, each human being gets an infinite amount of choices. Living the mystical life daily is about facing obstacles and challenges. The level of awareness that you are working at means you have a responsibility to be equal with it. How does one truly let go of expectation? You can make the moment that you wake up to the moment you go to sleep sacred. The keys to success: choice, 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 and choice.